South Fayetteers. South Fayetters? What are we called anyway?
People who live in South Fayette.
South Fayettians, people who live in South Fayette. We'll go with that. Thanks so much for being here. I'm pleased to see such a great turnout. My name is Andrea Igler. I'm the South Fayette Township Community Development Director. And I'm pleased to present this program in conjunction with the Historical Society of South Fayette Township. This year we're celebrating South Fayette Township's 175th anniversary. So we're having a series all summer, the second Tuesday of each month, June, July, August, to learn about and talk about the history of South Fayette Township. So this evening, we have a great program for you. First, you're going to hear from Emily Brady, who is the president of the Historical Society. And then we have our featured speaker, Charles Mills, who was an employee at Boys Home. We also will have a video of the late Mr. Mike Cardillo talking about his memories from last spring of Boys Home. And we have some exhibits. The Historical Society, afterward we can peruse some photos and some copies of letters and some other great memorabilia at their tables. And then over at the township table, we have some 175th anniversary merchandise, some t-shirts, and hats and chocolate bars that are for sale, and proceeds from that will partly benefit the Historical Society. Also, I'll just mention too back there, we have the opportunity for you to write down a memory of South Fayette, and that will go in our time capsule later this year. And we also have the opportunity to purchase a brick that will be installed in our new park to commemorate our 175th. Most importantly, the restrooms are back toward the kitchen, back down the hall there. There is water, help yourselves to that. There's some coffee and some wonderful brownies with SF writing on them, made specially for us by Morgan's General's Market right up the street. So thank you for being here, and I'd like to introduce Emily Brady now, the president of the Historical Society of South Fayette Township.
Good evening. Very glad to have all you folks here with us tonight. I just want to make a little announcement and thank the township, okay? Thank the township for inviting the Historical Society to have this celebration event this year. At this point, I would like to give you a little bit of a background on our speaker, Mr. Mills. He's given me his bio, and I'd like to read it for you. And Mr. Mills says, I am not a native of South Fayette, but have been employed there since 1961 when I started working at the Boys Home. I have been a resident of the township for over 33 years. It's a great place to live, lots of growth and friendly people. The schools are excellent, the students and the faculty, their sports teams are second to none. However, back in 1950, a scrappy little band of South Fayette football players beat a heavily favored McDonald High football team that I just happened to be a member of. I still haven't gotten over that, but I'm working on it. Is that it? That's it. I thought there was another part to it. But anyhow, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Charles Mills. Charles, will you come up?
I'd like to say good evening to everyone. Okay. More? Can you hear me now? Sounds like those phone calls you get from those people trying to get your money. Can you hear me now? Well, if you can hear me now, I'd like to say good evening to Mrs. Brady, members of the South Fayette Association, Township, and friends. It's my pleasure to be with you this evening. I had a very long list, if you will, of things to say covering my time at the home. If I went through all that, we would all be sound asleep by the time I got through that process. So I've cut it down to give you a break and so I can get down in my nervousness up here. So I'm going to say I started my employment at the boys' home in 1961. I wouldn't have been there at all except for a chance meeting I had with Mr. Dunlap. At this meeting, we discussed things in general, and he told me this time that there was indeed an opening at the home for a part-time night watchman, and if I were interested, that I should apply at the home, which I did at the next day. I went down, and was hired immediately, which was kind of scary. But as I say, I was hired. I started working with a Mr. Tom Saint. Now, Mr. Saint was the night supervisor. He would be, in today's terms, I guess what we'd call head of security. But we hadn't advanced that far then, so he was in charge of the night shift. I joined him in this position, and our primary function was to police the area, patrol, I should say, the area at night. We also would make stops at Cleveland Cottage, Honor Hall, and Barrett Cottage. These being the places where the young men were sleeping. In making these rounds, we would stop and talk to the night men in these particular cottages, giving them a chance to eat their lunch, take a walk, have a smoke break, what have you. We did this various times at the night and ended up our shift in the morning, usually someplace in the Barrett Cottage area. We also were required by Mr. Dunlap to turn in a written report of the night's activities. Well, this was kind of hard to do. There just wasn't that much going on at night, but we were supposed to hand in this report, which we did. Again, I worked in this capacity at the home with not too much taking place until the advent of the quote-unquote boys' home course. Mr. Dunlap had told me that he was interested in developing a course and asked me if I knew anyone that might be able to handle that chore. Well, I knew immediately who I was going to refer. It was a Bonnie Edmonds, a member of our little society from McDonald, and we went to the same church. I knew how excellent she was in the area of working with young people because she headed up a young choir at the McDonald church. She was also the church organist and pianist, so she was a natural choice. And it wasn't very long before she had whipped this band of ruffians into a first-rate group. This gave me probably my first exposure to being around the boys per se. Of course, when you work at night, the guys are sleeping. I mean, you know, what can you do? How much can you learn? So when I was assigned to be with the course, that gave me a chance, so to speak. I went with them on all their functions and all their practices. And again, I say Bonnie did a terrific job. I say so because she met with some resistance. I guess there's always resistance to change, but the resistance she was receiving came primarily from some of the higher-ups, if you will, working over in the farm area. They were reluctant to release their boys to this helter-skelter singing group, which they felt was just a waste of time, so on and so forth. And I know for a fact that some of them went out of their way to try to talk the boys out of quitting the course and encouraged even the boys' friends in their peer group to say ugly things about the group. Well, they persevered, and she whipped them into a first-rate group. In fact, they became a singing ambassadors, if you will, from the boys' home. Their high point coming the day that we, since I was privileged to be with them, I traveled with them all the time, made an appearance at KDK TV. This is back in the days when Bill Burns and people was there. I recall how small the studio was where the program was held. I had no idea it was that small. I also recall sitting on Bill Burns' desk while all this was going on. So it was a nice exposure. But this was the beginning, I say, from working with the choral group to have direct access to the boys and being able to do one-to-ones, if you will. My second experience or opportunity to work with the guys one-to-one came when I was an assistant coach on the football team. All those things that I said about people in high places resisting change and not wanting to help out came around again. In this case, though, there was no talk about, oh, this is sissies, what have you, since the football team was far from a band of sissies. But they did make it very uncomfortable at times for the young men to be on the team. Again, luck was on our side, or on their side. The team persevered, and we had an excellent record that year, going, I think it was 6-1, maybe 7. Now the one, not a loss, but a tie. And we played the B teams of the schools around us, such as Fort Jerry. We didn't play South Fayette, but Fort Jerry, Canada, etc. The principal reason why we played these B units is our team was small. We didn't have the numbers to really hold up against these bigger teams, and attrition would have gotten to us as the games proceeded. Although I think our guys would have given a pretty good account of themselves in most cases. But here again, this gave me the chance, the exposure again, if you will, to deal with young men, what I refer to as a one-to-one situation. Again, my time at the home was from 1961 until 1965. I left at that particular time to go to YDC Canonsburg. Some of you may not know what that name means, but if I say Morganza, then you know what I'm talking about, which is where I went. I worked there at Morganza, YDC Canonsburg, from 1965 until 1968, when I did return back to Oakdale. A couple of flattering things that I always remember and appreciate happened to me when I first left. I was told that Mr. Dunlap wrote a nasty letter to the higher-ups at YDC Canonsburg, accusing them of partying away an employee. I was very flattered by this. And I remember the afternoon in particular, Mr. Dunlap himself showed up in my workplace at YDC Canonsburg, trying to get me to go back to the home. Again, this was very, very flattering, and I did appreciate that. However, I did not go at that time, and would not have gone at all, to be truthful, had it not been for the fact that this workplace, YDC Canonsburg, closed in 1968. So I go back to Oakdale, and when I got back, things were in a state of change, which I didn't realize right away. They didn't even have a regular job for me. I just went from place to place, filling in wherever I was needed. But, lost here. Let's take a look at my notes here. So working where it was needed, and I say the change was coming. The change came in several ways. I, along with one other staff member, went to a conference at George Junior Republic, and those people and myself and this other college parent exchanged information, ideas, if you will, about how we worked and what we should do and couldn't do. And then a little later, the home sent me to Indiana University for a semester in criminal psychology. I very much appreciated that chance and exposure. I worked there with a lot of police officers, probation officers, and one state policeman who was in undercover. And he had some interesting stories for us. But when I got back to the home, again, change was still going on. I replaced the longtime supervisor at Barrett Cottage. This was all very flattering to me. In this case, I became the first African American to hold such a position. I was already the first African American to ever be employed at the institution, and Bonnie Edmonds, who I referred to previously, was, of course, the first African American female to work at the boys' home. But now again, having been elected to this position, I was able to meet and work and talk with the boys in what I refer to as a one-on-one situation. In such cases, I remember I talked to a young man, I can't remember his last name right now, his first name was Chico. I found out that he was interested in working with his hands in the earth, etc. I was able to get him a position working at the Nobletown greenhouse. I was really proud of this because nothing like this had ever occurred at the home, to have someone work off grounds like that without any supervision. He was looked upon more or less, I guess, as what we call today as just a trustee. He went and came, we took him there, of course, and there was no problems. I was really proud of him and what we were able to do. In the interim, I did what I could for the kids. I spent a lot of my time playing basketball, football, and touch football with the boys. In these sessions, we talked about one thing or another, and such topics came up as religion, what they were going to do when they got back home, and the current situation in Nam, as we call it, Vietnam. About Vietnam, I told him truthfully, I says, well, if I were in you guys' position, I don't know exactly what I would do. I don't know if I would serve or if I would go to Canada. I tried to always be truthful with these guys. I learned that, I learned from my family experience, from things my grandfather taught me, that if you always tell the truth, you can be comfortable with that, and when you have to repeat something or tell somebody something, then you're going to be okay. So the boys accepted this. When I was asked about such things as dating, ladies, whatever, I told them, yeah, that I was taught to treat women with respect, and I hope that they would do the same. I would go on to tell them that sometimes this was difficult to do because not everyone, ladies or gentlemen, didn't always hold themselves in respect. But I also thought that sometimes maybe a kind word for one of my boys, one of us, might help to get these people back on the track. So I was doing things like this and I really felt good about it. I tell you about another individual, a young man, his name was Patrick, won't give you his last name, but I nicknamed Shaky. Now I gave him this nickname because he had a habit of huffing gasoline or glue. That was the term that the kids used when they ingested these materials, huffing. And he was quite shaky, even more than I am right now, by using this material. I hammered away as subtly as I could, trying to persuade him that this was not the way to go. And by the time he left the agency, of course, we tried not to make these things available to him. He had changed his ways. I have a letter from him, which is back from the rear of the building here, from him, telling me that he got out and he was doing all right. Now, those were all those years ago. I don't know what happened to the young man, but it did give me a great feeling of satisfaction to know my own little way I had helped him. Because when I named him Shaky, not to criticize him, it kind of gave him instant status among his peer group. And Shaky did all right. As we spent our time playing cards. Now, the cards were not for gambling. We played hearts, which was a game that we all liked, and we had a lot of fun doing that. And this is what I was discussing, these other areas. Also, it would come up about music. They liked, of course, all the rock music of the day. Santana, Beatles, Crosby, Stills, Nash, those sort of people. Myself, I was a jazz fan, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Brubeck, etc. And we would exchange different viewpoints on different music. The guys tried their best to convert me to their music unsuccessfully. I did the same part on my side unsuccessfully. But I was able at one point to take 6 boys to a concert in Pittsburgh at the old Civic Arena. That's what we called it then. And we saw Sly and the Family Stone. What an experience. The kids referred to him, and I knew why immediately, as Sly and the Stoned Family. but anyhow, when we got there, I told the guys, I said, take a good look at where we're seated. so you know where we are, because I know you're going to go smoke. I know you're going to get something to eat. If somebody gives you a hard time, send somebody back to get me, and we'll see what we can do about straightening out the situation. I was also somewhat concerned that these boys had pocket change and were dressed very nice, and in a crowd like that could have just melted into the crowd, and that would have been that. But they all stayed, which I'm really proud of. And at the end of the concert, when my eyes got better, my lungs got better, we went back home and things were okay. I could go on forever here reciting one area after another, but I don't want to put everybody to sleep with these pictures. So basically, that's about what I did there. So if anybody want to ask a question or anything like that now, it's okay with me, or we're going to do that later.
Yes, thank you, Charles. I think we are going to have yes, definitely a round of applause for that. We will have time shortly for some discussion and some questions for Charles, but if you want to take a moment for a drink of water, what we could do first is watch there you go, watch a short video of Mr. Mike Cardillo, who unfortunately passed away recently, but we were fortunate enough to record him speaking about some of his memories of Boys Home last May. So we'd like to play that for you. As soon as the technology gets working. That's one thing, that history, sure, they didn't have any equipment like this back then, did they? Boys Home. Oh, there it was. Oh, look, there's Ryan. Maybe you could flip those switches so we can see the screen a little better.
Wait to my big moment, I didn't want to blow it.
Oh, tell me my name. I'm Mike Cardillo. My family moved into South Fayette in 1914. And we bordered on the boys' home. And it was just like being bordered on any other family farm. That's the way it was. We lived next to the boys' home. Our family's been there for 100 years now. But the family moved in, the boys' home was there for 9 or 10 years already. And they bordered on our property. And they farmed the same way as a farm family would farm. It was like a fam family. They raised most of their own food, and the boys did most of the work. So I had a cottage for the gardeners, and a cottage for the one that had the dairy, and they had chicken, and one of the cottages just raised chickens and pigs. But the 5 boys they had there would work with a team of horses, and when they had 2 tractors, they would operate them. And a boy would only stay there till he was 21. Then during World War II, most of the boys, when they reached 18 years old, went to the military. And during the Korean War, when they reached 18 years old, would go to the military. And they was all disciplined, receiving the same kind of discipline that you would receive in the military. And it was one of the finest institutions that I know, because the boys was there and we lived next door. You never had to take the keys out of your vehicles in the barnyard or keep your doors locked. That's how safe it was. And when a boy got out of there, he had the work ethics, he had the discipline, and he could go out and make a living. The farm was beautiful. Now, most of it's growing up in woods, because our family had worked some of it that kept it from growing up in woods, and the hormones worked some. But what wasn't worked is all grown up in woods, and it's only scrub trees, and trees will never become good for timber. And it looks like a mess compared to it was when the boys' home was there, because it was a beautiful place.
A beautiful farm, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, and that was the video of Mr. Cardillo. We did want to make another note before the Q&A about the status of what was the boys' home property. Some of that, of course, is privately owned now. Some of it is owned by South Fayette Township. So the current boys' home park in South Fayette Township, of course, is part of that former boys' home property. Part of the former boys' home property also is under the Allegheny County Farmland Preservation Program, which the township put into place maybe about 10 years ago now. And also on another section of the former boys' home, the township is in the process of developing a new park, and that's, you would access that from Seminary Avenue near Oakdale, up from the post office. So there are 3 athletic fields being developed there now, a walkway, and we hope to build other things there, such as a playground and some other activities for folks on that side of town. With Mr. Mills and what you heard from Mr. Cardillo's video, let's have some questions and discussion now. Any of your own thoughts and memories, questions for Mr. Mills, anything at all? Let's open it up.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I'm Fred Cardillo, and my family is still farming at this home. And that was my father up there speaking. And I just want to add that we still are farming over there, and it is still a beautiful place. Not as beautiful as it was when they had 20 or 30 kids over there maintaining everything. But it is nice, and thank you for the township giving us the opportunity to farm over there. And it is a nice place to visit. You can walk over there and walk around and see nature. But my dad shared a lot of stories over the years about the boys' home with me and my family and my cousins. And in fact, when I was in kindergarten, we had our field trip was at the boys' home at the farm. And it was awesome. They had cattle, they had calf pens, they had chickens, and everything was as neat as it can. They had a jail in the one barn. I don't know if you know that, but my dad speaking, when he spoke, he was speaking of the 40s and 50s. He actually worked there also. But if any kids were bad, they got to spend time in the jail. And they were very strictly disciplined, as my dad said. You probably already know that too. And they, like my dad said, we never had an issue with the boys. And in fact, I went to St. Patrick's Church, and every Sunday the whole one side of the church was filled with boys from the boys' home, well-behaved boys. And it's a nice part of South Fayette's history to learn about that and share the stories. And I think there was even a book written about the boys' home. And I haven't put my finger on it yet. I'm sure we have it somewhere. But that would be an interesting thing to happen. As Mr. Mills said, it was a good place. It was a good place to work. It was neat. The boys were behaved. I'm sure there were some discipline problems because I don't know the history of the boys, but I'm sure they were there for a reason. I think that it was a time when that could be done, and it's a shame that that kind of thing isn't done again today, because the discipline and the work ethic is a major thing. And like I said, the farm is, a lot of places it's like it was back then, but it's just when you have 30 or so boys maintaining all the paths and the trails and the fields, it's a lot nicer than when you got two or three old guys trying to take care of something. So, but thank you for your opportunity to speak, but it was a pretty good place. Thank you.
Do you recall a man that worked there by the name of McQuaid? I think his name was Bob McQuaid. The kids that I lived with would go up at the boys' home and walk around, and he would show us around different places up there.
No, I don't recall that name at all. But something I would say about the boys in general. Back in the day, as I say, the kids that came there were from broken homes and no place to go, so they were sent to the boys' home. Now, down through the years, that changed. Most of the kids that we had or that came to those doors were there because they had been adjudicated as delinquent by the court system in Allegheny County. All these young men were always the most pleasant young men we wanted to encounter. Home staff did what they could to try to change that somewhat. In regard to the boys that worked the fields, the farm that you saw, yes, that occurred, but by the time I got there, most of that had come to an end or was coming to an end very fast, only because young men in these situations were referred to as peonage. They were working and were not paid according to how they should have been compensated for the work that they were doing. So those work conditions just dried up or eliminated. I saw similar conditions taking place when I worked at Mayview State Hospital, where I hate to call them inmates, where some of the residents were in similar situations. They were in work positions where they worked hard and received some pay, but it was nowhere near what they should have received, and they too were affected by what was referred to as peonage. I can tell you more about the group at main building. I think most of us, when we think about the home, thought about the main building where most of the boys were, most of the young boys. There was anywhere from, I dare say, maybe 90 to 100, maybe 20 youngsters at main building. The age limits here would be, I don't know, maybe from 10 through perhaps 14. Then when you got over to the farm area, at the top of the hill was Cleveland Memorial College. There was 16 to 20 young men that worked there. I shouldn't say worked there, they were housed there. A few of them did do some chores in and around the place. Also by this time, we had a few kids, almost every college, that were going to South Fayette High School. So as we continue down the hill, we come to Honor Hall. There was perhaps 8 to 10, maybe 12 young men there. And again, you had 1 or 2 that went to school. And I think Honor Hall was misnamed. There wasn't much that those guys did, and they were no more honorable than the rest of the kids, but somehow that place acquired that name. When you got down to Berry Cottage, as you mentioned, that's where your workforce was. There was anywhere from, I dare say, 35 to 40 young men that were housed there. And a great majority of them were involved in tilling the fields, working with tractors, maintaining the roads, so on and so forth. And theirs was a pretty much a hard life, to tell you the truth. But that's what they did.
Hi, my name is Lou Lerbier, and I went to South Fayette High School in the early 50s. And I went to school with a number of the boys from the boys' home, and they were all very, very nice individuals. But sometimes things go wrong, and some years later, I married Maxine Krosky. I'm sure you know the Kroskys here tonight. And I was down at the home of her mother and father one evening, and at that particular time, in those days, I never took my keys out of the car. I always left them in the car, and nothing usually ever happened. But that particular night, the car disappeared out of the yard and it was gone. So I went home, and about an hour later, I got a call from my mother and said, "Guess what? Your father's car has been stolen." He was at the County Sports Club that evening. As it turned out, some boys had left the boys' home and found his car and my car at the same time and took them both. And fortunately, mine didn't have much gas in it, and they found it down in 51, not too far away. It had run out of gas. And my father's car was more up towards Lewistown, up towards Central College, or State College. And we went up and we retrieved it also. But it was kind of an interesting situation to have both cars from the same family stolen on the same night.
Sir, I can speak to that also. I mentioned when I returned to the boys' home, there was change in the wind. Some of the change happened because the home adapted what was referred to as an honor system. Now, this system was very much in play when I worked at YDC Canonsburg. What I meant by that, some of the young men were given the privilege of walking around, if you will, but they had to report back at a certain time. Now, originally at Oakdale, you had none of that. But with the change, this system came into play. The system, again, I say, was what I was accustomed to at YDC Canonsburg. And then one of the supervisors who followed me from YDC Canonsburg back to Oakdale when I went there, he came also, and he encouraged the powers that be to try this system. I can't say that that's when their car was stolen, but I have a pretty good idea. It was at times like this because it gave some men the chance to be unsupervised for great periods of time in and around the institution, which did not occur in the bad old days when they were under direct supervision. So there's a good likelihood that's when this occurred.
I have a question. When you were there, were you staying at the Barker Cottage?
Beg pardon?
The cottage where you stayed at the boys' home?
Ma'am, I didn't stay in any of the cottage. Most of the employees did stay on grounds. I stayed in McDonald where I came from. Now,
I understand when they built the Barker Cottage, they said that there was about 50 boys. Was that amount of boys at that time?
ma'am, I couldn't understand what you said.
She said at the time when they built the Barker College, was there 50, they said there was 50 boys there, is that right? At the Barker Cottage.
I have no knowledge of this cottage at all, ma'am. I'm familiar with Cleveland Cottage, Arnold Hall, and Barrett Cottage. Again, I was there from 61 to 65 when I went to Canonsburg, and I came back in 68 to 72 when the home closed. And I did not know the existence of this particular building that you're talking about, ma'am.
Well, I was wondering how many boys were there about that time.
You mean at the home period or just one location?
And I asked also, when you were staying there, how was your Barker Cottage heated? Did you have gas heat or how?
Ma'am, I still can't understand you.
You mean the Barrett Cottage?
I think, are we talking about Barrack Cottage, perhaps? And you're wondering how it was, how they heated the buildings?
Yeah, the building.
It was steam heat.
Oh.
Anyhow, the reason I'm asking is, at that time, it was a big oil thing and gas thing, and they built oil wells on the property. And I was wondering if there was oil wells on the boys' home property when you were there.
Yeah. Were there oil wells on the boys' home property while you were there?
Good question. I'm not sure. It's been a while, ma'am. There's a good chance there was an oil well located in a sector we refer to as the Ridge. The Ridge being a small cottage where some of the boys from Barrett went to work in that particular area during the daylight and returned back to Barrett Cottage that evening. I had been to that location on a few occasions, and there may have been an oil well in that area. I couldn't be positive on that. It's been too much time.
I thank you. I will say one thing. I went to church in Oakdale, and I watched those boys walk every Sunday from the boys' home to Oakdale to attend church. And they sat in front of us. They were a very, very wonderful, very polite bunch of boys. And I thank you so much.
So you had a good experience with them, seeing the boys at church. You can pass that to Emily behind you, please.
Mr. Mills, I was reading some of the articles and the books I found in the library home, and I noticed that at one part they said in the book, I think it was in 1914 or 1917, the report said that they had 250 boys in this facility, and then they downgraded where they came from. And I understand that all of the boys that came there had to be from Pennsylvania, that they did not go out of the state.
That's correct. To the best of my knowledge, I don't believe they went out of the state. And a great deal of the boys came from the Allegheny County area, and there were quite a few that came from clear across the state, from the Philadelphia area, Bucks County, etc. We had boys from Erie and a few from the central part of the state. But the bulk of them did come from the Allegheny County area, as far as I know.
I just want to add one more thing. Back in the day, when my dad worked here, that was in the 1940s, 1950s, they were pretty much self-sufficient. They had a butcher shop, they had a dairy, they raised their own meat, they raised their own milk, they made their own cheese, they sold milk, they sold eggs. They were pretty much self-sufficient. And as time went by, I guess it became, the work was not legal, I guess, by the government determined it was wrong to do that for kids, which I think is great to make them work. They should still do that today. Whether they're getting paid or not, they're getting room and board. They don't need to get paid. That's my opinion. But anyway, they were raised well. They were self-sufficient. They had a gym. They had a wood shop. They had a dairy. They had everything they needed. They wouldn't even have to leave the site for their food. But then the government wanted stuff, USDA, all this stuff, and that's when everything started going downhill, falling apart. So that's, in my opinion, what I saw from talking with other people, prior to, your time. It seemed a lot different back in the, during the war and right after the war than it got when you were there. Thank you, sorry.
I agree with most what you're saying, sir. However, peonage and the amount of work that these young men were doing was changed in as much as the state didn't take a kind look at these proceedings. If these individuals were going to be working, then they should be compensated a proper amount for their efforts, for their blood, sweat, and tears, if you will. And these are the reasons why you saw these cattle, the corn, what have you, all these things disappearing because they could no longer carry out this sort of activity. As a matter of fact, when I returned to the home in '68, most all of those things were gone. The milk was brought in by a company. It wasn't too long that we stopped feeding in the cottages, and the boys in the farm area all went up to Honor Hall, and they were served their meals there. Now, when I first arrived there, they were still eating family style in the cottages. I ate one meal there. I'm not a big eater. I was always welcome, and there was plenty to eat, and they ate well, you know. But that all went away, actually in part because they couldn't justify what was going on, if you will.
Government intervention.
You can call it that.
Yeah.
Hi. Well, it's pretty loud. Hi, Dave Igler. I grew up in South Fayette. Just a couple of points. We thought of the boys' home growing up. A lot of the people thought of them as largely juvenile delinquents, but in truth, most of the kids were orphans, homeless, disadvantaged kids. I particularly remember a kid in high school. He came to South Fayette High School. He was a gifted musician, one of the nicest kids you'd ever meet. And he was from the boys' home, and that gave a lot of us a different perspective on the kids over there, what they were going through. They weren't all car thieves. Some of them were just kids in an unfortunate situation. So that gave us a new perspective. Another quick thing I want to mention that I don't think anyone has mentioned is there was a short time in the early 70s where some wayward girls were housed in trailers there. I don't know if anyone knows about that. Full disclosure, my friend and I snuck down there to see them and got chased out. So they really did have girls there for a short time. I don't know how long that was, but I thought I'd bring that up too.
I'd like to respond to the quote-unquote girls on the premises. That's news to me. I'm not going to say it never occurred, but I never knew that it happened.
Yes, my name is Ed Hyber, and we grew up on the far side of the Wishbone property here in Dickinson. And my father was a game warden. And back in early mid-60s, we'd get ready to kill deer. We'd take them down to the boys' home, and we'd drop them off down on the lower boys' home where the spring house was.
That would be the Bear Cottage area you're talking about?
Yes, right. And they used to bring us cases of jarred apple butter or baskets of apples and that, and so it kind of worked out pretty well both ways. That was I kind of miss it being the old farm that was like that.
The houses are still on Boys Home Road. What can you tell us about that?
Beg pardon?
There's 3 houses on Boys Home Road still. What can you tell us about those?
On houses on Boys Home?
On the Boys Home Road itself, there's still 3 Boys Home houses. They're still there.
The only thing I can tell you about the houses in that area is when you came from Main Village and went to the farm and got into that area, there was that area we refer to as the point, quote unquote. There was a building there. There was, for lack of a better word, your reception area. There was a telephone operator there, a male staff, and I know for a fact that 2 other homes were built in that same area during the time that I was there. The home, since it was private property, didn't have to adhere to all the building regs that they should have, although the houses that I saw were very nicely built because we had some skilled work staff there, and again, there was a chance for our some boys to learn the trade working in this area. But that's all I could say about the houses in that area.
It's right at the intersection with the Boys Home.
I know what you're talking about.
Somebody told me they used to park a school bus under the one for the basketball games. They took them to the basketball games. And the one house has little rooms in the basement with bars on the windows. So they were disciplined.
I can't address that. I have heard that there was such an area way back when. I don't like to speak of the ugliness, but I can tell you for a fact that at main building, there was an area where quote-unquote runaways, if you will, were housed. And this was because, and I know this for a fact also, sometimes these runaways sustained some injuries while they were away. And I must say truthfully that what I know, some of these injuries occurred because they were done by various staff members trying to put the fear of God in these kids, make sure they didn't run away again. In fact, there was this location in main building where if you ran away, you were housed for about a 30-day period of time. This gave you a time to think about running away again, and or if you had sustained some injury, it would heal, and if you had a visit, your family wouldn't see these injuries. Those were not pleasant things, and I don't want to stand here and bring down all those people that are no longer with us and say, oh, it was terrible what they did, and I did all the right stuff. But I do know that some of these things occurred if you go back a little bit.
Did anybody ever keep any records about the success level of the kids that were housed there?
No, sir, as far as I know. I'm really proud of my little records that I've turned over to the Historical Society. That will give you a little record, but again, there was no aftercare, if you will, done there to the best of my knowledge. So when you were gone, you were just gone. While the home was still there, we got calls, some people got letters from individuals, but that was an individual effort, if you will, and nothing that was done by the home itself.
I don't know if everybody out here is familiar, but the township purchased that property in 1987. And it was purchased just after the juvenile detention center was closed. After your time there, it did become a strictly penal institution with barbed wire and serpentina wire across it, and the one new building, the newest building was built by 1975. And we as a Township Board of Commissioners purchased that property because at one point in time it was going to be the site of what is now the Brownsville Jail. And so we purchased that property, quite honestly, for $1,500 an acre, sold off the pieces that were developed by the two real estate companies, got more than our money back again, and then still created the parks. However, one thing never did happen, and that was Honor Hall was at that point a rehabable building. It had classrooms, cafeterias, kitchens,
Agreed.
Administrative buildings.
Agreed.
It did need windows and a roof, and had that been done, that building would have been still usable today. And there was also a very nice but small gymnasium on the backside.
Yes, I agree.
That building had absolutely perfect hardwood floors. I used to take my kid in there when they were soccer practice, and we actually practiced soccer indoors at some times. We then purchased that whole property, and after that, Officer Stankowski, the one policeman, lived there for years, and some other people down there before it really became fully developed. So that property really was purchased out of desperation, and this township went and purchased it in 1987 when I was on the board, and turned a profit, and something unique and different that they didn't think that the township should do, but we really did it to put it back on the tax rolls, and it's probably paid for itself 100 times over since then.
From whom was it purchased?
What's that?
From whom was it purchased?
The state.
Wesley?
The Wesley Institute, and they had their agreement with the state of Pennsylvania for that. The state only rented a small 15-acre spot up at the very top, where there was the building that had the serpentina wire and the concertina wire and all that stuff around it. That, by the way, was one of the ugliest buildings. I had the great privilege of touring that building, and it was like a gulag. It was at the other buildings, the hall, Honor Hall, the gymnasium, the two homes at the bottom. The barn had just been destroyed. If you remember, it fell down under its own accord. And then on the very back side, people don't realize that there's another side of the boys' home right across from Biber's garage, that there's actually an entrance that goes all the way back. Not up where you guys live, but down at the bottom.
No, we lived down at the
Oh,
bottom.
okay. But, there's actually a very nice little cottage. I think it was the supervisor's cabin home at one time. And there was a bunch of garages and a small barn. I think Fred still uses it, don't you? Yeah. But anyways, that was a very nice. Unfortunately, there's also some bad in it. The 1916 explosion at the chemical plant had some, let's say, less than desirable fallout that was also buried back there. So that, I think, has been remediated or has long since gone away, but we were aware of that as well.
Sir, I had heard about the small Guantanamo Bay, for lack of a better word, that was formed there, and it indeed was an ugly, terrible place. I agree with you again about Honor Hall. That was a nice building, and I thought, well, surely maybe this would be saved, as well as the gym and those floors you talked about. I remember it well, and it's a shame that it went by the wayside. I also recall there was a football field there, and during that season when our old team went undefeated, we played a few games on that exact field there. I remember the extra point that went under the crossbar, it cost us a victory against one of our foes. That was the only time we had that year. And this was in 1964 when Mr. Weir was coach at South Fayette, and they too had an undefeated team up there, Class B champions. Well, he and some of his boys used to come down to the home to use our whirlpool. I guess you'd call them hot tubs today, but we call them whirlpools. And they come down to use our facility because they didn't have such a place. But Mr. Weir was a very good friend of the team and of us.
That was now a soccer field, was also the junior varsity practice field for South Fayette football. And John Allen, you probably practiced down there when you were in junior high, because at that time South Fayette did not have a home field. We used to play our home field games in Carnegie.
We used to practice basketball down there.
Yeah, the thing that I'll add too, I believe the boys' home shut down in 1975.
72, sir.
Well, they had a big sale in 1975, and we bought some of the equipment. Actually, we bought the thrashing machine and the binder that they used over there, and we had saved it for years. And I just last year sold it to some Amish people up in Smicksburg, and it's in use today. The thrashing machine and the binder from the boys' home.
Any other questions or comments? I see some of you are looking at the Boys Home article that was in last summer's South Fayette Connect magazine. I did notice, Mr. Mills, we found in some documents a newsletter from, I think, the 20s from Boys Home, and they had some anecdotal evidence of what happened to boys after they left the home, and when they wrote and said what they were doing, they had a little report in the newsletter about where they were at, and a couple of those are quoted in that article. But so it sounds like we had some anecdotal evidence, but no statistics per se. All right, well, if there are no other group discussion right now, please give another hand for Mr. Mills for being our featured speaker tonight. Thank you. We appreciate him sharing his story, and all of you as well. Please feel free to stick around for a while and peruse the materials on the Historical Society table and the Township table. Also, please take a flyer from the table by the entrance. Our next installment of the historical series will be Tuesday, July 11th, right here in the same place. We're going to talk about fire department history. All 4 of South Fayette fire departments will be here. And I believe that Bob Rank also will be coming to speak. He's the oldest serving member of the Oak Ridge Volunteer Fire Department, having started in Sturgeon. So please join us for this as well. And thank you again for coming. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Happy 175th.